Hello, this is a Pacesetter training video on Sketch. This is one of a few different videos on Sketch that we have out to help anybody that needs some training on general use of Sketch. We're not going to go and do deep dives in Sketch. We're going to go do some basic foundational work to help you understand how to navigate around Sketch with the different menus and tools, and basically how to do some general drawing of roofs and interiors. If you want some more detailed information on Sketch, you can certainly go on the web. There's training videos out there. You may also want to consider getting some Xactimate certifications. So let's start with just some general navigation around Sketch in this video. If you're not sure how to get there in Sketch, if you go to the navigation bar to the left in the claim, you would select Estimate and then Sketch. That would open up your Sketch view. You may have this view when you open Sketch where you have these two panes. This is a search menu for line items in the price database for your claim, and then we have actual areas where you can add line items here. Typically, you're not using this. There are some instances where you may need something like this in some of these views. For instance, if you're using the cut and drop method on carpet and the carrier requires you to use that in Xactimate, it's another tool and function within Xactimate. We may look at that in another video. You may need these panes open to do that. Generally, you don't. If you just want to close those and hide them and have more real estate to draw in, the way you get rid of these or hide or view these is left click in the main drawing window and then shift enter. Shift enter again will bring them back. Just click in the field again and shift enter again, and they will hide. So let's look at a few of the menus and some of the tools. You're going to have three main menus: tools, options, and annotation. So we're in the tools menu now. The tools menu is where you're mostly going to be working. This has most of your drawing tools and your shaping tools. You have some function tools, normal like Windows type function tools, a selector tool, undo, copy, cut, paste, that kind of stuff here. You're typically going to be using the roof and room when you're drawing exterior, or rather roofs and rooms. You can do some work in here on elevations. If you're doing siding and you want to sketch siding, you certainly can. There's another training video we have with another Xactimate feature for doing rooms and elevations. It's called the dimensioning tool. Highly recommend you take a look at that as well. It's a very powerful tool. You can draw decks, staircases, add walls within rooms, fencing, windows, doors. You may be already familiar with some of this. These are basically shapes that you can drop in. And then we have some manipulation areas. This is adding a break tool, a square break, vertex. We'll look at that briefly here in a minute. We'll go more in detail on that when we get into another video on actually using those and drawing. These are flipping the image you have or the selection you have horizontally or vertically, rotating the image or the selector, whatever you have selected, the roof or the room. Scale, you're probably not going to use too much. This puts a reference scale in. Yeah, you may use this, but generally you're just going to be dragging handles to shapes and typing measurements in to get your shapes to the measurements you want. Flooring is what we talked about, or we haven't talked about, but it's, well, briefly we did about the cut and drop method. You would use this flooring orientation to see which direction that the carpet may be laying to show you the different waste factors on seams. Again, not typically used, but just know it's there. We're not going to go deep dive into this. These are some important tools: block tool, area, line, and point tools. Reference points you're not using too often. Line reference tools can be useful at times to see and check measurements, or use referencing to draw something out to a measurement using the reference line tool for that. Maybe you want to stretch a roof out to a certain measurement to meet another area of the roof, and you don't know what that relationship is, so you can use the line tool for that. It's a temporary kind of a reference type line. Block tools are very important that you can use on interiors for sketching when you're doing, say, kitchens and you're replacing floors or painting walls, and you have cabinetry on the floors and or the walls, and you want to subtract out the portion of those cabinets that are touching the floor or the wall because you're not going to paint that area or replace that floor. And you can set these blocks and tell Xactimate on each side of the block what you want it to do. You can have it subtract out that square footage, for instance, on the underside of the block that's sitting on the floor, which would be the cabinet. Very powerful tool. Area tool is something that you can use. You put on areas that it's usually for marking purposes. Like, say, I've always used this tool for when I put my test squares on a roof drawing, because typically the carrier wants you to show them where you did your test squares. This is a good tool. It's quicker than just doing a rectangle and then typing in the rectangle, because you have to use two separate tools for that. We'll look at some of these as we get going, but this is just the tools menu. Mainly you're going to be working in here. Roofing, very common. If you drop the menu down, it gives you different roofing shapes to start with, including some custom shapes. And typically the room is just going to be a square room that you can start manipulating. The options tab gives you basically preferences and general global type options setting. Preferences is where you can go set things like the default wall thickness of rooms you're drawing, the ceiling height. And keep in mind, this preferences in this tab is only for this claim. It's not preferences in your Xactimate program in general. There are some other settings for that in the preferences settings of the profile in Xactimate. That's where your local project is, not in the claim. These settings are specific to the claim assignment. But you can do different types of global settings. For instance, you can go into door and window defaults, and you can tell Xactimate, if I put doors or windows in and drop them in, they're all going to be 2 foot 6 inches by 6 foot 8 inches, as an example. So again, preferences, global options within the claim. Export, import, you don't use these too often. The import tool you will use for a Google Earth technique. If you're not familiar with this tracing technique, it's similar to what third-party pictometry companies like EagleView use. You can learn that technique yourself. We have another training video for that. I highly recommend you take a look at that. It's a very powerful, great tool to have in your adjuster toolkit. And you would use this import underlaying images to drop into Sketch to trace over that image. So again, if you're interested in that, search out that other video for using that Google Earth technique. Most of these others, again, are general. We're not going to go over these right now. These aren't used too often. If you have more questions, you can certainly check with your manager or claim supervisor or the training department with Pacesetter, and they can help you as well. The last is the annotation tab. This is where you would annotate. In other words, you can put text, you can type, put that all over the sketch. You can move it around. You can draw lines, rectangles, arrows, freeform. You can fill shapes, line thicknesses. Very powerful tool if you need. In certain areas, you will need this. Certain carriers require this. And just to be practice good adjusting, there are things that you would use in this. For instance, something that may be required by the carriers, they want to know where the front of the house is. So if you draw a roof, they want to know where the front of the house is. So you may need to go to your annotation tool, click on text, click in the viewing field, type the word front. Okay, and now we can grab our handle and move this around to wherever the front of the house is. Likewise, let's delete these. If you're working on an interior sketch, and let's say you had some floor damage over here, some water damage, and we had a leak in a cabinet from a water supply line, say to a refrigerator, something like that, and it damaged some cabinetry and flooring. You may want to use the annotation tool. You typically would want to do this, especially on water loss claims. is let everybody know in your sketch where the water source was and what the water source was. If it was a line or a sump pump overflow or something like that, maybe a toilet overflow. Grab the ellipse tool and then kind of show us where the damage was. If you want to bring that out and show it up a little clearer, you can go in and change the line color, for instance, to red. Maybe make the line a little bit thicker. And then go to your ellipse tool and say, here's where the water damage was. And it also flowed down this way on the side of the wall. You can also, in the same instances, you can type. Be descriptive. You can do that. Draw a little arrow maybe of where the toilet was. You can do it that way. You could maybe draw a little rectangle, change the line color to something else like, say, green, and draw a little toilet here. And then you can draw a little line pointing to that, an arrow. One other cool aspect of Xactimate is, for instance, you want to put some images, some preset templates on images. You can bring back those viewing panes, and you down here it defaults typically to the search tab where you can search in here, but you can also go to symbols, and there's all kinds of symbols included in Xactimate if you wanted to really do these really nice pretty sketches. Not required, but if you want to make it look good and you're trying to tell everybody something, and say you wanted to do plumbing, and let's look in here, and you have bath and toilet. Here's a bath toilet, for instance. Well, maybe there's our toilet right there. Let's zoom in. You can see this. You can rotate this, of course. Let's rotate it 90 degrees. You can make it larger if you want. There we go. Got to select it properly there. If I can get it, there we go. And then the little red diamond, we can move it around. Maybe it's in the corner here, wherever. So you could do water source, toilet. You could draw an arrow to it. You could put it right down there. They can see where it is. But maybe you want to let them know where the water source is and what the damaged areas are. Another use for the annotation tool would be in, say, wind claims, where you have a roof and you're not doing test squares, and you want to show where the wind damage is. The old default method in the industry was putting X's everywhere. You can certainly still do that. It's a little tedious. I recommend just use circles or ellipses. Use larger ellipses for larger damage areas with large swaths of shingles blown off the roof, for instance. If you have some smaller areas with some creasing or fuse blown off or tearing, use smaller circles. So again, we would go back to the annotation tool, line width. We can, again, always change that. Set your color to whatever you think is reasonable. It shows up. And let's say we had a lot of damage here, a little damage here, some up here by the ridge cap. Show us where the wind damage was. So the annotation tools are very powerful tools to help you annotate and help you tell the story of what's going on. Again, some of it may be required by the carrier. That would be front of house as an example, and where your test squares are. Speaking of test squares, let's click on these and we'll kind of go through that real quick and show you that area tool we talked about. So we got a hail claim, and let's say we want to put our test squares in. If we use the area tool, we can just drag a box here. It doesn't have to be to scale necessarily. They just maybe want to see where it's located. You can double click right in the label and type in how many hits. And you're good. You can copy and paste this. Maybe I did another test square here, and that one had 10 hits. So we would just edit this. The good thing about this is that it saves you a little time, and you could just put the words down here, but you would have to go to the annotation, get the text tool, type it in. Some people use the rectangle tool, and that's fine, but all that does is draw a rectangle. It doesn't tell us how many hits you found. You would need to go do the text tool, type that in, 9 hits. It's just a little bit extra work when the area tool is much quicker to use. If you look at it in 3D, it also lays on the slope. Very cool. So, annotation tools, again, very good at annotating your sketches to tell a little bit more of the story. Down at the bottom right, we have some other tools down here. This is a viewing menu. This allows you to see different things. For instance, let's say you want to use a grid to align things better. By default, it does snap to grid, but maybe you're spinning things depending on how something is built, and maybe you want to see the grid. If you go to the view menu, you can turn the grid on and off. Maybe you want to turn your roof annotations off. I would not recommend that. Generally, you're going to want to see roof annotations. This is what helps you determine what your total square counts are. You may need to look at some of the facet designations and measurements if you have some of the facets that are maybe steep or high, where you want to know what those are and add those up to add steep charges in your estimate. This is a great tool to use for that. So just keep in mind, you have a view menu. This lets you show and hide a lot of different things here to your taste. This is a great tool. It's the outline tool. Basically, it makes your tools or your images that you drop down wireframe. Don't usually use this. This is used in that Google tracing trick so that you can see through the roof and see the underlaying image. But typically you're not using this, but just know it's there. This is your pan tool. You probably already know this. It gives you a little hand icon. You can click and drag the mouse around. Scrolling in and out will zoom. You can also have a, say, zoom to selection. This is this little tool right here. It zooms close into something like this. Maybe you have different roofs here, and you want to get, you're working over here, and you want to get back over here. You can just select that and then zoom to selection. So it zooms to the selected item. I'll delete this. And then this is your standard elevation view, which is the standard view in Sketch, but this is the 3D view. Very, very cool tool here. Hold the mouse down. You can spin it up and down. It's basically a 3D view. This comes into play on various areas where you're maybe intersecting rooms, and you want to see what it looks like. For instance, if we were to do an interior room, we'll do something very simple here. And let's say we put some windows, a missing wall here that goes into another room. We have a doorway. Keep in mind, when you put doorways in, another good thing is you can sketch these out into different shapes or lengths, rather. Use your flip horizontal. Kind of reorients the door, whether it opens from one hinge side or the other, or opens in or out of the room. But let's say you've added some things like this, and maybe you use the block tool for cabinetry, for instance, or something. And if you go to 3D view down here to the bottom right, this lets you kind of see what the images in the drawing looks like. You may need to orient something a little bit differently. It comes in handy to look, particularly on roofs, when you're drawing and putting roof shapes together, and in the elevation view, this top-down view, it's just not looking right, and maybe you need to kind of look at the 3D view to see how the pieces are put together, and you can see, oh, this needs to be moved over here, this needs to be raised up or down. That 3D view is a great view to look at. Lastly, we're going to kind of take a look at this. Not a lot of people know about this, the legend tool, but it normally is defaulted straight to the top of the software north. But that's not always the orientation of the roof. So for instance, or the house, let's say here's the house, but let's say north is pointing to the right, and you want to change this. The way you do this is you right click, view properties. We're not going to properties, that's different. That's properties of this selected area, or the overall properties of the empty area, but we want to view properties in the overall screen for this particular property. And then we're going to select legend, and there is our north pointer, and we can slide the slider all around. Say OK, and now we are pointing north to the right. A couple other things before we leave. You know, you can right click and undo. There's some other things, but we'll see this a little bit more. But there's a very important tool I want to talk about briefly to go over, and we'll look at this and some of the other when we do the roof sketches. And that would be if we right click directly on an object, a roof, and go to adjust height. By default, when you drop a roof in, the elevation eaves, height on the eaves are going to be at 0 elevation. They're on the ground. The roof is on the ground. But one thing that's very important that a lot of adjusters or estimators don't realize when they're learning sketch is to get roofs to be constructed properly and look properly and intersect properly, creating proper valleys and square counts, you have to move roofs up and down in elevation off the ground. And this is one way you can do it. There's other ways to do it, but this is a quick way, is again, right-clicking on the roof in question, adjust height, and then you can type in a measurement. So let's say 10 feet. So we can see in our little image it raised up off the ground. We can't see that here, and if we go to 3D view, we can't quite really see what's going on. We don't see walls or anything. But if we were to intersect this with another roof, let's drop a gable roof in. Now, remember, this is dropping in by the default height elevation. This is going to be on the ground. You want to double check? You can right click, adjust height. It's at 0 feet. This one is 10 feet off the ground. Let's intersect these two. Now let's go to 3D view. Now we can see that hip is elevated off the ground and that this gable is on the ground. We can raise this up. Now you can raise that eave up to this to adjust height to 10, which is even with the other. Kind of getting off topic a little bit. We'll deal with this a little bit in the roof sketching video, but wanted you to keep in mind that this is another tool that you have of navigating around and setting heights off the ground of different roof shapes. So that pretty much ends this video of just general navigation. Again, if you have any questions, check with your manager. And we will be doing some of these other videos. If you want more information on sketch, more specifics on roof, drawing roofs and interiors, take a look at those videos. Hope you have a great day. We'll see you on the next video.